Indeed, to the young activist mindset, miscegenation is forbidden. We are to be kept separate, but treated equally. Please understand your opponent. This is about the recent viral video there. What's my view on cultural appropriation, anyways? I think that there is some issue regarding being disrespectful towards people. But I don't think that those issues are relevant due to the concept of appropriation. I think that I'm ultimately not really able to make sense of the argument. When somebody says that you're appropriating my culture, I don't really recognize. I don't accept that as a valid accusation. Now that said, that doesn't mean I think that the museum in London has the right to hold on to artifacts from a tribe from Papua New Guinea or something, right? That was just a completely constructed example, but I don't think that, insofar as that's a concern, I'm not looking towards the idea of the culture being appropriated. I'm just saying that that's not, you're taking something that doesn't belong to you, not in terms of the culture, but in terms of the actual physical object. It's just theft. Whether you're talking about a ritual or some kind of a religious rite or a cultural practice, a hairstyle, a type of music, I don't think that this is a serious debate. So you can talk about hip hop. I think that you have a lot of explaining to do if you want me to take the idea seriously that you have some claim to a musical genre or an artistic form due to a skin color. I can agree with you that hip-hop largely came out of the black community, that it's mostly black people that have taken part in it, but I don't think there's any logical argument that black people therefore own it. And I think it has a lot to do with the fact that I reject the concept of property rights and intellectual property rights, right? So, I don't think that people have the right to have control over software or films or music that's of a certain age, right? And my rejection of property rights, intellectual property rights, in the broader context, rejects the idea of cultural property rights. Okay? But even so, I've just never seen the argument articulated well. If somebody could, in the comments, direct me to somewhere where the argument has been developed, that would be great. But it just seems to be taken for granted that if something is associated with a culture, then it belongs. Like I don't see where that makes sense, right? So in this video, they're suggesting something about dreadlocks. And there was a follow-up video where the guy says, Vikings did it as well, and somebody pressed him on it, and he seemed like he wasn't really able to answer the questions well. He seemed like he didn't really want to reject the idea. I will reject the idea flat out. Even if the premise was true, that dreadlocks came from Rastafarian culture and they were the only people that ever did it, I still don't think that you have some kind of a monopoly right over a haircut. And I think that if I was that guy, I would want to do that just to piss you off, right? I would be more inclined to support a protest movement that's about poking you in the eye and saying, no, you don't own this, right? To me, that's the issue. That's the issue I'm in solidarity with. I'm in solidarity with people that reject the idea that cultures have ownership rights over behaviors or practices. And I think that coming to a broader global culture and breaking down prejudices and divisions, um, I mean, suggesting that you don't own something as a culture is a prerequisite to building a more open, free society. I don't. I mean, even if I agreed, I wouldn't really want to associate with people that think that cultures are that insular, right? I don't like who would want to build a movement with people who would want to associate with those people, right? I'm not a voluntarist in the sense that it's usually bandied around, but I do believe in free association, and I certainly wouldn't want to associate with groups that want to, define themselves in such an insular manner. I would want to associate with groups that say, hey, I don't care what your skin color is, let's all be the same, right? So it's, I think that there's actually kind of I mean, this is an example of activists doing the work of the hierarchy, right? The hierarchy wants to divide you and conquer you and control you, and that's what they're doing here, right? They're saying that you can only have this hair color if you're this skin color. So you can only have this hairstyle if you're this skin color. So let's fight about it, right? Meanwhile, the banks are stealing both of their parents' houses, right? Um, but even if you sort of ignore that, it's still just I really just don't understand the argument, and I've never had anybody explain it to me. I've never seen anybody present me to literature that explains it well. It's just this sort of thing that's taken for granted, is that different races have different cultures and they shouldn't mix. And I have a really hard time understanding how it is that so many people that claim that they identify on the left can hold to this perspective. It's like they sound exactly like conservatives from the 50s. It's one thing to suggest that a lot of the reforms that happened in the 60s failed. I think a lot of us, regardless of where you stand in the fence, I think that it is pretty clear. I think a lot of it needs to be blamed on the policies of the 80s, right? To suggest that the policies of the 60s failed, and just because they did, they didn't fail in a vacuum. They failed because there was a lot of things that were set in motion to oppose them, right? The primary reason that the policies of Lyndon Johnson failed was Ronald Reagan's policies, because he undid a lot of them, right? But I do agree that a lot of the intent didn't transfer out. That doesn't mean that you should reverse it. Just because what happened in the 60s didn't work out doesn't mean we should go back to the 50s. I think that even acknowledging that the reforms of the 60s failed, the result was a lot better than the precondition in the 50s, right? So it's just a huge mess for me in my mind, and I really would love to see somebody actually articulate why this claim is supposedly valid. What the basis of the argument is, because it's just always been thrown at me as an assumption. And like I say, I've asked, and nobody really has the right, or at least nobody's ever provided me with a source that is actually convincing. Um, I just can't get my head around the claim. or why it is that I should accept it. But I mean, I certainly do agree that indigenous tribes should have control of their relics, or that um, caricatures of culture can be racist. But I mean, it's not when it, the problem with a caricature of a culture is not that they're appropriating it; it's that they're belittling it, right? The problem with taking relics of a society is not that they're appropriating it; is that they're stealing it. And I don't at all see how that applies towards somebody with a haircut, even if that haircut is only, or a fashion, any other fashion decision, right? So if somebody could explain that in a way that might make sense, that would be great.